Today, we're going to talk about a topic that can be pretty triggering for a lot of people, which is eating disorders. And if you are somebody who has an eating disorder that feels dangerous, life threatening in some way, I highly encourage you to go seek out medical support. With that being said, today we're going to talk about eating disorders. My name is Sean. I'm a mental health coach. I see 40 plus clients a week, and I have a 98% satisfaction rating from over 1,800 ratings. And there are two main reasons that I see eating disorders, sort of like underlying motivations for eating disorders from people that I speak with. The first is control, and the second are beauty standards. We're going to talk about both of those and sort of break them down today. So let's start with control. As human beings, we like control. We equate control to safety, and we don't like being out of control. When everything seems out of control, it leads to a whole lot of suffering. So a good example of this is if you think about, like the political landscape in the world today. A lot of people feel really powerless. They feel completely out of control. And so they feel depressed, miserable, like everything is pointless, worthless, hopeless, etc. And when we feel that way, we will grasp onto any ounce of control that we possibly can. And while everything in the world is burning, one thing that most people can control is what it is that they put into their body. I may not be able to control anything outside of me, but I can control what I put in my mouth or what I don't put in my mouth. And this is a very common phenomenon. And so like in that way of taking control over what it is that you put into your body, it makes you feel like you have some agency in the world, which is this common phenomenon that we observe in multiple different places. So one example that may seem, like completely out of left field, but is very applicable to this situation is the Salem witch trials. So during the Salem witch trials, these girls were growing up in a society where they were completely repressed. They had no power, no agency. And then what may have started out as just sort of like an honest call out of something based on their religious beliefs turned into, oh my God, when I do this, people actually listen. People actually pay attention. I actually have some sort of power in this dynamic. And it's not about the history. It's about the dynamic. It's about that, wow, this change of power dynamic, that it's like, oh, this is something that I actually have control over, even though it may lead to suffering long term. The other example is depression. So a lot of times people who go through depression will have days where they cannot get out of bed. And what often happens is that consciously or not, there will be a recognition that on days like that, responsibilities that seem really, really miserable are able to slip by the wayside. And so again, consciously or not, oftentimes there's this very nuanced, complicated thing that happens where the depression starts to become something that can be a crutch for people to use to not have to do the things that make them absolutely miserable. And again, it is this sort of latching onto something that ultimately ends up harming them, but gives them a sense of agency and control. An eating disorder is oftentimes very much the same way, that we are latching onto this control that we have around and what we can put into our body. And it can even become like a game where, every time you get on the scale, you can make the number on the scale go down. And that game can feel very empowering. Now, obviously, it is very maladaptive. It ultimately harms you more than helps you, but it does give you that sense of control. So as we think about this problem, then the question becomes like, okay, like what is the solution? What is the antidote? And what I have seen people that recover from eating disorders, what seems to lead to very good outcomes is finding, there's actually a few different options. There's finding an alternative control, something else that makes you feel like you have a sense of control in your life, surrendering the need for control, or some combination of both. So I'll give you a few examples. When I was working a job at a life insurance company, I was performing very well, but no matter how many times I advocated for myself, no matter how many times I asked for a raise or a promotion or whatever the case, I kept getting passed over, even though people were telling me like, oh, Sean, you're doing such a great job. We so appreciate you here. We so appreciate your work. I kept getting passed over for promotions. And so eventually, instead of when in this situation where I felt really powerless, I found a new form of control by leaving that job and finding a job where, you know, I was appreciated and my talents were utilized and all that sort of thing. On the other end of the spectrum, so that's like finding an alternative for control. I just found an alternative job. On the other end of the spectrum, you have surrendering the need for control. So when I was younger, I really struggled with job hunting, and I would try to, like, you know, be what they wanted me to be for job interviews, where I would try to figure out exactly, you know, the right things to say. I would like write down notes and like practice for the job interview and try to come up with the perfect answer to every question. And what ended up happening was that people started to pick up in the job interview about how uncomfortable I was and how disingenuous it was and all of this stuff. And so I wouldn't perform well at job interviews, even though like my interpersonal skills are very, very good. And it wasn't until I started to say, you know what? I'm just gonna be me and like genuinely engage in the way. And if it's not a match, then it's not a match, and I'll move on and find something that is. It wasn't until I started doing that I started killing at interviews. I started landing every job that I interviewed for. So now let's take an example of both, where, you know, some combination of finding an alternative for control and also surrendering the need for control. And that is the mental health crisis. In the world today, we have a mental health crisis, and there is no way as a single individual person that I can cure the entire mental health crisis. I cannot help every single person on the planet work on their mental health and get better mental health. And so, to a certain extent, I have to surrender to that. I have to surrender to the truth that I cannot help every single individual on the planet. And at the same time, I can do a lot for a select number of people. I can go very, very deep. And I can also, you know, put out mental health resources that can reach a wider audience and all of this sort of thing. And so in focusing on the thing that I have control over, in focusing on making these free resources for the people that it's valuable to, in showing up every day for my clients, it gives me a huge sense of agency and allows me to function in the world that I experience, you know, that I see all of this suffering in. In giving these examples and talking about these ways of sort of dealing with the way in which you find control, which, you know, if you're watching this video, it may be because it may be that the way that you have found control is through an eating disorder. And as we talk about these alternatives, I just want to ask you, what feels right to you? Is it to surrender control entirely? In which case, one exercise that I'd like to sort of throw out to you to suggest is a somatic exercise, where you think about the control that you feel like you don't have. So, you know, in the earlier example of the mental health crisis, you think about all of the people that are suffering in the world, and you feel those emotions come up in your body. Where are those emotions located in your body? And you allow those emotions, you allow yourself to actually feel those emotions rather than pushing them away. And as you sit and feel that emotion, over time, what will happen is that the feeling will change. You'll feel it start to like move through your body in different ways. You'll feel the feeling start to fade because emotions naturally fluctuate. And as you pay attention and allow that emotion to flow through your system, it will slowly but surely start to pass. And on the other hand, if control feels like a better alternative to you, one recommendation that I would give is creativity. I've talked about this in an article that I wrote on Substack. I'll link it down below. But I think that creativity is one of the best ways to give yourself a sense of agency, especially in this world where, the world is getting overrun with AI. I think that cultivating creativity is one of the most important skills that you can cultivate. And the reason why I think creativity is so empowering is because you are literally creating something. So even if it is something small, even if something that your brain dismisses as insignificant, you are bringing something into the universe that wasn't there before. You had a thought in your brain and manifested it into reality. That's fucking amazing. That's incredible. And this is something that I hear a lot from people that have chronic illness, is that in engaging with something that has some sort of creativity, it can make their chronic illness feel more livable, because, make them suffer less within their chronic illness, because they feel like they have some kind of agency. They are able to do something in the world. We have talked about eating disorders when it comes to control. Now let's talk about eating disorders when it comes to beauty standards. So I want you to imagine for a second that you grew up in an environment where all of the people, all of the adults in your life that surrounded you were constantly getting on new diets, constantly complaining about how fat they looked, constantly, criticizing you, saying like you look pregnant, but then also at the same time, like making these like huge meals and like, giving you soda and like stacking your plate up and, like feeding you all this stuff. Imagine what that would do to how you think about your relationship with food and your body. And then, not only that, but then on top of that, there's also media where, like if you think about a movie or a TV show, the one who like gets the guy is always the like crazy, doesn't exist in nature. Even the actress herself doesn't actually look like that girl who, has the perfect body is always and then like the fat girl is always the one that's like the comic relief. And so like what kind of course you think that you need to subscribe to this beauty standard, because there is so much in your environment that is constantly encouraging this. And so ultimately, when it comes to eating disorders that have to do with beauty standards, it is all about worth. Either you can be hungry or you can be worthless. And when the decision is hunger or worthlessness, of course you're going to choose hungry. Of course you're going to choose hungry, because no one wants to feel worthless. So it makes perfect sense that you would choose hungry. It makes perfect sense that you would choose to deprive your body of sustenance in this way. And what I want to say about this is that I get it. In my own journey with my, relationship with myself, I felt very ugly. I thought I was very ugly. And I had, people talk to me about this sort of thing all the time. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again in case you haven't heard it. I had a girl see a picture of my brother, who is very conventionally attractive. And she said, "That's your brother?" I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "But he's so hot." Implying, how could he be your brother because you're so ugly? And so I thought that I was very ugly. And it wasn't until I had this realization that there is a huge difference between feeling beautiful and trying to look beautiful that that relationship with myself started to change. And I think that this trying to look beautiful is problematic because of two main reasons. The first is beauty is so incredibly subjective. So not only does it change, across history, in the past, being overweight was actually a huge sign of beauty because it meant that you could afford to eat. It meant that you were not starving. But even on even not across time, even in modern day, there is so much variance across what people find attractive. So I'll give you an example. In high school, there was this girl who I still remember to this day. She was gorgeous. She was, like very, very conventionally attractive. Her name was Vanessa Orozco. And she I don't even believe in this concept, but just to sort of describe, she was a girl that guys who, like me, thought that they were ugly would consider to be out of their league. But I was friends with her, and one day I was having a conversation with her, and she was talking about this teacher that was at the school that we went to, whose name was Mr. Coleman. And Mr. Coleman, just so y'all have a picture, Mr. Coleman was balding. He had a huge, huge beard. He had a dad bod, essentially. He had like a big belly. He was like an old football player who hadn't like kept his shape up, essentially. And then he had like hair all over his body, just like super, super hairy guy. And she was drooling over how hot she found him. And it was in that moment that I realized, like, oh, beauty is completely subjective. Because if she finds him beautiful, then there's no rhyme or reason. There's no way, there's no rules. There's no rules to the universe. The other reason that I think that this idea of chasing beauty doesn't work is because our senses are so easily distorted. There's this quote from A Christmas Carol where he says something like, you may be an underdone piece of potato. You may be a blot of mustard when he's seeing Marley and not believing that Marley is actually there as a ghost. And our senses really are easily distorted. So for a lot of people that have eating disorders, they look in the mirror and they actually have no idea what they look like, because what they see is being distorted by their brain. It is being distorted by how they see themselves. And I have worked with people that can like step into the mirror, see one thing, step out of the frame of the mirror, and then step back in and see something completely different. And so basing our sense of beauty off of what it is that we look like is completely arbitrary, because we don't even know what we actually look like. It is all based on our perception. The question becomes, if eating disorders, when it comes to beauty standards, are all about worth, what actually defines the worth of a human being? And I think it would be good to like pause the video for a second and actually ask yourself that question. What do you think defines your worth as a human being? My answer, if you've unpaused the video now, my answer is that worth is inherent. So if you think about like a baby, for instance, a baby is not concerned about if it is worthless or not. It's not, if you think about a baby, ultimately they drool all over the place. They poop and pee on themselves. They have, they can't actually do anything. They can't even hold up their own head. Like, objectively, they're pretty worthless. Like, they don't do anything. But they're happy as can be. They're like giggling and, drooling and having a great time. And so when we are born, we have this inherent sense of worth. And then what happens is, as we go throughout our life, stuff happens to us. Things make us start to question our sense of worth and sort of like layer on top more and more reasons to doubt our sense of worth. And so our sense of worth gets buried underneath all of these things that happen to us throughout our life. And so in my mind, finding your sense of worth is not something that you chase. It is not something that you achieve. You don't do something to achieve your sense of worth. It is actually about peeling back all of the layers that have built up, that have hidden your sense of worth from you, and discovering your sense of worth inside of you. A little exercise to give you around this. What I want you to do is I want you to notice just start by noticing when you attach your sense of worth to how it is that you look. When, if eating the wrong thing makes you feel worthless because it's going to make you fat, or if, you know, gaining a few extra pounds makes you feel worthless. When you notice that you attach your worth to your weight, to how you look, every time that you're able to notice that, it is going to start to separate or break down that mechanism just a little bit. And then I want you to think about the little girl that had to go through that. The little girl that, you know, ate a piece of cake and was judged horribly for eating that piece of cake. The little girl who, you know, who got asked if she was pregnant because she had a little bit of a tummy that was perfectly natural for a little girl. And think about what it was that she needed in that moment. What adult did she need to come to her, and what did she need that adult to say or do? And as you do that, start to pay attention to, you can literally visualize this in your head of like you going to this little girl as an adult and having a conversation with her where you say what you think that she needed to hear. And as you do that, pay attention to how she responds and show up for her the way that you would show up, you know, like how you would actually feel toward that little girl, the compassion and empathy that you would feel toward that little girl. And to be very clear, this is not going to change overnight. This has been building up for, you know, for a lot of people for decades. And so it is going to take time to break down this mechanism. But the more that you do this, the more that you notice it, the more that you have these conversations with yourself and like give yourself what you actually need, I think that you will start to notice the difference between something like skinny and healthy, something like, you know, feeling beautiful and chasing beauty. And ultimately, the reason that I want to make this video is because eating disorders, they really poke my heart, because they are just another way in which people are forced to shrink themselves down because of the expectations that exist around them or because they feel so powerless, which is exactly what I try to help people with. So if you really resonated with this video, with this idea, the ideas that I talked about in this video, if this video felt helpful to you, and you want somebody to help you further along that journey, to sort of, you know, have somebody to hold your hand along the way, I am happy to do a free 50-minute session with you where we work through this sort of stuff. So I'll leave a link down in the description where you can schedule a free 50-minute session with me. And if you want to know why these kind of topics are so important to me, this video that'll either pop up here or down in the description goes into detail about how I found my why and why it's important to me. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.